The morning sun cast golden rays across the bustling streets of London as thousands of people gathered along the parade route. Children sat perched on their parents' shoulders, waving small British flags with excitement. The air buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited for the royal procession to begin. Street vendors sold commemorative items while tourists snapped photos of the historic buildings lining the route. Among the crowd stood Officer James Mitchell, a royal protection officer with 15 years of experience. His sharp eyes constantly scanned the faces in the crowd, the rooftops, and every potential point of concern. James had trained for countless hours to be prepared for any situation. His earpiece crackled with routine communications from other security personnel positioned throughout the area. The parade was celebrating a significant charitable initiative that Kate, the Princess of Wales, had championed for years. She had worked tirelessly to bring attention to mental health support for children and families across the United Kingdom. The event was meant to showcase the success of various programs and honor the volunteers who made them possible. Kate arrived in an elegant open carriage. Wearing a soft blue dress that complemented the clear sky above, she smiled warmly at the crowds, waving to children who called out her name. The genuine joy on her face reflected her passion for the cause being celebrated. Behind her carriage, several other royal family members followed in their own vehicles. Creating a magnificent procession through the historic streets, James maintained his position near a security checkpoint. His attention divided between the immediate surroundings and the radio communications flowing through his earpiece. Everything seemed perfect. The crowd was enthusiastic but orderly. The weather cooperated beautifully. The parade moved smoothly along its planned route without any delays or complications. However, something caught James's attention. In the upper window of a building approximately 300 meters ahead of the parade route, he noticed a brief flash of light. It could have been anything, perhaps just sunlight reflecting off glass. But his training told him to investigate every anomaly, no matter how insignificant it might seem. He raised his binoculars and focused on the window. At first, he saw nothing unusual. The building appeared to be a standard office complex with most windows showing typical workplace scenes or remaining empty. He was about to dismiss his concern when he saw it again, a deliberate pattern of flashes. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. His heart rate increased immediately. That pattern was universally recognized in security protocols. It was a distress signal, but more specifically, it followed the code that security teams use to indicate a serious threat. Someone in that building was sending a warning. James immediately pressed his radio button and spoke, quietly but urgently, to the command center. The response came back within seconds. Other officers had also spotted the signal and were already mobilizing. The building in question had been cleared earlier that morning as part of standard security procedures. But something had clearly changed. James knew that every second mattered now. The parade was moving steadily toward that exact location. He began moving quickly through the crowd, keeping his movements smooth, to avoid causing panic among the civilians. His mind raced through the various protocols he had memorized. The parade could not simply stop abruptly, as that would create chaos and potentially put more people at risk. The route needed to be altered smoothly and naturally. James reached the primary security vehicle that traveled alongside the royal carriages. He spoke rapidly to the senior officer inside, explaining what he had observed. The officer's expression remained calm, but his actions were swift and decisive. Commands went out to multiple teams simultaneously. Within the carriage, Kate continued to wave and smile at the crowd, completely unaware of the developing situation. This was intentional. The security team's job was to handle threats without disrupting the event or alarming the public unless absolutely necessary. The other royal family members also continued their participation. Trusting the experienced security personnel to manage any concerns, James received new instructions through his earpiece. A tactical team was being deployed to the building where the signal originated. Meanwhile, traffic officers positioned ahead were already implementing a backup plan to redirect the parade route. The changes needed to appear natural and planned to prevent suspicion or panic. The parade marshal, working closely with security, began implementing subtle adjustments. An announcement went out over loudspeakers that, due to the overwhelming crowd response, The parade would be taking an extended route through additional streets to allow more people to participate in the celebration. The crowd cheered at this news, completely unaware of the real reason for the change. Kate's carriage began a gentle turn onto a side street that had been part of the contingency planning. The princess continued her engagement with the crowd, now waving to surprised and delighted residents who had not expected the parade to pass their locations. The entire redirection happened so smoothly that most observers assumed it had always been part of the plan. James maintained visual contact with the suspicious building while continuing to move with the parade. Through his binoculars, he saw the tactical team entering the structure from multiple access points. They moved with practiced efficiency, their black uniforms barely visible as they worked their way through the building. The minutes felt like hours as James waited for confirmation about what the team might find. His responsibility now was to maintain security along the new route, while his colleagues handled the potential threat. He continued scanning faces in the crowd, checking doorways and windows, ensuring that no secondary concerns emerged. Finally, his earpiece crackled with an update. The tactical team had reached the floor where the signal originated. They had found a security guard who worked in one of the offices. The guard had noticed suspicious activity involving an individual who had accessed a restricted area of the building. The person had claimed to be a maintenance worker, but several details did not match the building's records. The tactical team located the individual in question and detained him for questioning. In his possession, they found items that confirmed he had no legitimate reason to be in that building. While the exact nature of his intentions remained under investigation, the security team had successfully prevented whatever he had planned. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. Though his expression remained professionally neutral, the parade continued along its new route, and Kate kept engaging with the crowds who felt fortunate to have this unexpected opportunity to see the princess up close. The event that could have become a crisis had been managed so effectively that most people would never know anything unusual had occurred. The parade continued through the alternate streets of London as Kate remained graciously engaged with the unexpected crowds. Children pressed against the barriers, their faces lit up with excitement at seeing the princess so close to their homes. Many residents had come outside in their casual clothes, surprised but delighted by the procession passing through their neighborhood. James Mitchell kept pace with the carriage while maintaining constant communication with the command center. His earpiece provided continuous updates about the situation at the office building. The detained individual was being transported to a secure location for questioning. Initial reports suggested he had been monitoring the parade route from that elevated position. Though investigators were still determining his full intentions, security teams throughout the area remained on high alert. The successful interception of one potential threat did not mean they could relax their vigilance. James knew from experience that threats sometimes came in coordinated waves, with one incident serving as a distraction for another. His eyes continued their systematic scan of every face, every window, every parked vehicle along the new route. Kate's personal protection officer, Sarah Chen, moved closer to the carriage. Sarah had been with the princess for 7 years and had developed an almost intuitive understanding of potential dangers. She noticed the subtle changes in the security formation around them and understood immediately that something had occurred. However, she maintained her composed demeanor, ensuring that Kate remained comfortable and unaware of any concerns. The parade route now took them through a historic district filled with beautiful Georgian architecture. The narrow streets created different security challenges than the wide boulevards originally planned. James coordinated with officers positioned ahead to ensure adequate coverage of the tighter spaces. Additional personnel were quickly deployed to rooftops and key intersections. Among the crowd, a photographer named David Torres had positioned himself to capture images of the parade. He had worked for various news agencies for over 20 years and had covered countless royal events. David noticed the route change immediately and recognized it was not part of the original plan published days earlier. His journalistic instincts told him something significant had happened. However, David also noticed how smoothly the security team managed the transition. He watched James and other officers moving with purpose, but without panic. He observed how they positioned themselves, strategically while maintaining a non-threatening presence that kept the public calm. David decided to focus his camera on capturing the joy of the crowds and Kate's warm interactions rather than trying to uncover what security matter might be unfolding. Inside the command center, Director Elizabeth Hartley monitored multiple screens showing feeds from cameras positioned throughout the parade route. She had overseen royal security for 12 years and had managed situations far more complex than this. Nevertheless, every incident required her complete attention and decisive leadership. Elizabeth received reports from the interrogation team working with the detained individual. The man had claimed he was simply taking photographs, but the equipment found in his possession suggested otherwise. Specialized tools typically used for electronic interference had been discovered in his bag. The investigation was expanding to determine if he had accomplices or if this had been a solo operation. Back along the parade route, Kate stepped out of her carriage at a planned stop, where she was scheduled to meet with volunteers from various charitable organizations. The location had been part of the original itinerary, though they arrived from a different direction than initially intended. The princess moved gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories from people whose lives had been touched by the mental health program she and supported. James positioned himself at a point where he could observe both Kate and the surrounding environment. He watched as she knelt down to speak with a young girl who had brought flowers. The child's mother explained that their family had received support through one of the princess's initiatives during a difficult time. Kate listened with genuine interest, her empathy evident in her expressions and responses. Sarah stayed within arm's reach of Kate throughout the interactions, her trained eyes constantly assessing each person who approached. She noticed a man in the crowd who seemed overly focused on his phone rather than the princess. Sarah quietly alerted James, who moved to observe the individual more closely. James approached casually, positioning himself where he could see the man's phone screen. The man was simply recording video of the event, like hundreds of other people in the crowd. James noted his appearance for the record, but determined he posed no immediate threat. This type of constant evaluation was exhausting, but absolutely necessary for maintaining security. The meet and greet concluded successfully, and Kate returned to her carriage for the final portion of the parade. The procession would end at a community center, where she would deliver a speech and participate in activities with local children. The security team had already verified that location multiple times, but they conducted another sweep while the parade traveled the remaining distance. As they approached the community center, James received confirmation that the building where the signal had originated was now completely secure. A full forensic team was examining the area where the detained man had been positioned. They were analyzing his equipment and any materials he might have left behind. The carriage pulled up to the community center, where a crowd of invited guests waited behind proper security barriers. Kate stepped down gracefully, her smile never wavering despite the long morning in the open carriage. She had no idea that her security team had just managed a significant threat, and that was exactly how they preferred it. Inside the community center, Kate was greeted by the director of the facility and several prominent supporters of the mental health initiative. She moved through the prepared program with her characteristic warmth and authenticity. In one room, she sat with children, participating in art therapy sessions. In another, she spoke with teenagers who had benefited from counseling services. Each interaction was meaningful and genuine. James and Sarah maintained their protective positions throughout the indoor portion of the event. The controlled environment of the community center was easier to secure than the open parade route, but they never reduced their alertness. They communicated regularly with the command center, receiving updates about the ongoing investigation. Director Hartley sent a message to all security personnel involved in the morning's events. She commended them for their professional handling of the situation and reminded them that the day was not yet finished. The afternoon would include additional public appearances, each requiring the same level of attention and preparedness. The detained individual was finally identified through fingerprint analysis. He had a history of minor offenses, but nothing that would have flagged him as a significant security risk. Investigators were working to understand what had motivated him to position himself in that building with sophisticated equipment. His answers during questioning were vague and inconsistent. suggesting he might be protecting someone else or following instructions from another party. Kate concluded her speech too enthusiastic. Applause from the audience gathered in the community center's main hall. She spoke eloquently about the importance of mental health support and thanked everyone who contributed to making these programs possible. Her words were heartfelt and inspired many in the audience to continue their support of these vital initiatives. As the event wrapped up, Kate prepared to depart in her motorcade for the return to the palace. The security team had adjusted their routes and protocols based on the morning's incident. They would take different streets and employ additional precautionary measures to ensure her safe return. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the palace grounds as the security team gathered for their debriefing. James Mitchell sat in the conference room alongside 20 other officers who had been positioned throughout the parade route. Director Elizabeth Hartley stood at the front of the room, preparing to review the morning's events in detail. Elizabeth began by acknowledging the successful outcome. Kate had completed her public appearances without incident. The crowds had remained safe and happy, and a potential threat had been neutralized without causing public alarm. However, she emphasized that their work was far from finished. Understanding exactly what had been prevented and whether any additional threats existed remained crucial priorities. The investigation team presented their preliminary findings. The detained individual, identified as Marcus Webb, had been working as a freelance technology consultant. His background check revealed no previous security concerns, which raised questions about how he had been recruited or motivated to take his position in that building. The equipment found in his possession included signal jamming devices that could have disrupted communications between security personnel. James listened carefully to every detail. If Marcus had successfully activated those jamming devices at a critical moment, the security team's ability to coordinate and respond to threats would have been severely compromised. The fact that an alert security guard in the building had spotted suspicious behavior and sent the code red signal had potentially saved lives. The security guard who had raised the alarm, a man named Robert Patterson, was also present at the debriefing. Robert worked for a private security company contracted to protect the office building. He explained that he had noticed Marcus entering a restricted floor using what appeared to be a copied access card. When Robert attempted to verify Marcus's credentials, the man had provided inconsistent information. Robert had immediately recognized this as suspicious behavior, especially on the morning of a major royal event. Rather than confronting Marcus directly, which might have triggered a dangerous response, Robert had retreated to a safe position and used a flashlight to send the code red signal that security personnel watching for exactly such warnings would recognize. His quick thinking and proper training had made all the difference. Elizabeth commended Robert for his actions and announced that he would receive formal recognition for his role in protecting public safety. She also noted that this incident highlighted the importance of coordinating with private security firms and ensuring that all personnel working in the vicinity of royal events understood proper protocols. The meeting shifted to discussing how Marcus had obtained information about the parade route and timing. Investigators discovered that he had accessed publicly available information from news reports and official announcements. However, some of the equipment he carried suggested a level of planning that went beyond casual interest. The investigation was exploring whether he had connections to any organized groups. Sarah Chen, Kate's personal protection officer, raised an important question. Had there been any indication that the princess specifically was the target, or was this a more general threat against the royal family? The distinction mattered for future security planning and risk assessment. The investigation team admitted they did not yet have a definitive answer to that. Marcus's interrogation had revealed little useful information. He claimed he was simply interested in security systems and had wanted to observe them in action. His explanations for the jamming equipment were vague and unconvincing. Investigators suspected he was either protecting accomplices or feared retaliation if he revealed who might have directed his actions. James contributed his observations from the parade route. He described the precise moment when he had first noticed the light signal and how the security team had coordinated the route change. He emphasized that the transition had occurred so smoothly that media reports from the event had barely mentioned it. With most journalists assuming it had been a planned enhancement to allow more public access, the team reviewed footage from multiple cameras positioned along both the original route and the alternate path taken. The video showed Kate's carriage making the turn onto the side street with such natural timing that even experienced royal watchers had not questioned it. This seamless execution was the result of countless hours of training and preparation. Elizabeth turned the discussion to lessons learned and improvements for future events. While the outcome had been successful, she wanted to identify any weaknesses in their protocols that this incident had exposed. Several officers suggested enhanced coordination with building security in the days leading up to major events, not just the morning of the occasion. Another suggestion involved expanding the types of signals that private security personnel might use to communicate threats. Robert's use of the light signal had been effective, but not all security guards would have known that protocol. Creating a more standardized system across different security organizations could improve overall response capabilities. The technical team presented information about the jamming devices that Marcus had carried. They explained that these devices had become increasingly sophisticated and more easily available through online markets. Security forces needed to develop better detection methods and countermeasures to protect their communication systems against such interference. James raised the question of how they would communicate the morning's events to Kate and other members of the royal family. It was standard practice to brief them on security incidents after the fact, but the timing and level of detail required careful consideration. They needed to be informed without causing unnecessary anxiety about future public appearances. Elizabeth decided that she would personally brief Kate within the next day. The princess had a right to know about threats against her, but the information would be presented in a way that emphasized the effectiveness of her security team rather than dwelling on what might have happened. The goal was to maintain her confidence in the safety protocols without making her feel vulnerable. The meeting continued for another hour, covering various technical details and procedural reviews. Each officer who had played a role in managing the situation provided their perspective. The debriefing was thorough because every detail mattered for improving future responses and understanding the full scope of what had occurred. As the formal meeting concluded, several officers gathered in smaller groups to discuss specific aspects of the day's events. James found himself talking with Sarah about the challenge of maintaining constant vigilance during long public events. They both acknowledged feeling the mental fatigue that came from hours of sustained high alertness. Robert Patterson, the building security guard, approached James to thank him for the professional way the situation had been handled. Robert admitted that he had been nervous about whether his signal would be noticed and understood. Learning that multiple officers had spotted it and immediately taken action reassured him that the security system worked as it was designed to. James assured Robert that his actions had been textbook perfect. By remaining calm, observing carefully, and using the proper protocol to report his concerns, Robert had enabled the security team to respond effectively. James encouraged him to continue that level of professionalism in his daily work, noting that vigilant security personnel at all levels formed the foundation of public safety. The investigation team departed to continue their work on understanding Marcus's background and potential connections. They would be interviewing his known associates, examining his financial records, and analyzing his electronic devices for any communications that might reveal his motivations or collaborators. This process would likely take several days or even weeks to complete thoroughly. Elizabeth dismissed the remaining officers, reminding them to maintain confidentiality about the details discussed. The public would receive only general information about enhanced security measures during the parade. Specific details about the threat and response would remain classified to protect operational security and avoid providing potential adversaries with information about protective protocols. James left the palace as evening approached. The streets of London were returning to their normal rhythm after the excitement of the morning's parade. People were dining at restaurants, shopping in stores, and going about their lives completely unaware of how close they had come to witnessing something terrible. That anonymity was the greatest success of all. 3 days after the parade incident, Director Elizabeth Hartley arrived at Kensington Palace for her scheduled briefing with Kate. The princess had been informed that this meeting would discuss security matters related to the recent charity event. Elizabeth carried a folder containing photographs, timeline documents, and a carefully prepared summary of what had transpired. Kate welcomed Elizabeth into her private office. A comfortable room decorated with family photographs and artwork, created by children from various charitable programs she supported. The princess offered tea, and they settled into chairs, positioned near a window overlooking the palace gardens. Despite the serious nature of the meeting, Kate's demeanor remained calm and welcoming. Elizabeth began by assuring Kate that the parade had been a tremendous success from a public relations standpoint. The media coverage had been overwhelmingly positive, focusing on the princess's warm interactions with crowds and the important message about mental health support. Thousands of people had lined the streets, and social media had been filled with favorable comments and photographs from attendees. However, Elizabeth continued, there had been a security concern that the team had managed effectively during the event. She explained the situation methodically, starting with James Mitchell's observation of the unusual light signal from the office building. Kate listened attentively, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she understood the implications. Elizabeth showed Kate photographs of the building where Marcus Webb had been positioned. She explained how the security guard Robert Patterson had noticed suspicious behavior and used the proper protocol to alert royal protection officers. The director emphasized that the system had worked exactly as designed, with multiple layers of security personnel identifying and responding to the potential threat. Kate asked thoughtful questions about the timeline of events. She wanted to understand at what point during the parade the threat had been identified, and how the security team had made the decision to alter the route. Elizabeth walked her through each step, using a map to show both the original, planned route and the alternate path her carriage had taken. The princess was particularly interested in learning about Marcus Webb and what investigators had discovered about his intentions. Elizabeth shared what information she could while respecting the ongoing investigation. Marcus had been charged with several offenses related to trespassing and possession of equipment that could be used to interfere with security operations. Investigators were still working to determine whether he had acted alone or as part of a larger group. Kate expressed gratitude for the professionalism and quick response of her security team. She acknowledged that she had noticed absolutely nothing unusual during the parade, which Elizabeth explained was intentional. The goal of royal protection was to handle threats without disrupting events or causing alarm to either the principal being protected or the general public. Elizabeth then addressed future implications. While this incident had been resolved successfully, it highlighted the evolving nature of security threats. Individuals with access to increasingly sophisticated technology could potentially disrupt communications or create other challenges for protection teams. The security services were constantly adapting their methods and equipment to stay ahead of such threats. The princess asked whether she should change anything about how she approached public appearances. Elizabeth firmly assured her that no changes were necessary. The security team's job was to enable Kate to fulfill her public duties safely, not to restrict her activities. However, Elizabeth did request that Kate continue to trust her security personnel completely and follow any instructions immediately if a situation ever required. They discussed the balance between accessibility and security. Kate had built her public reputation partly on being approachable and genuine with the people she met. She did not want security concerns to create a barrier between her and the communities she served. Elizabeth agreed this was important and explained how the security team worked constantly to enable that accessibility while maintaining proper protective measures. Kate mentioned that she had several upcoming public engagements, including visits to schools, hospitals, and community centers. Elizabeth reviewed the security plans for each event, explaining how lessons learned from the parade incident would enhance protocols for future appearances. Additional coordination with local security personnel, enhanced surveillance of nearby buildings, and improved communication systems were all being implemented. The conversation shifted to discussing the positive aspects of the parade. Kate had been deeply moved by the turnout and the enthusiastic support from people of all ages. She shared stories about some of the individuals she had met, particularly children who had benefited from mental health programs. These personal connections reminded her why she persisted in public service, despite the associated risks. Elizabeth mentioned that Robert Patterson, the security guard whose alert had initiated the response, would be receiving recognition for his actions. Kate immediately asked if she could personally thank him. Elizabeth arranged for Robert to visit the palace the following week, where Kate would have the opportunity to express her appreciation directly. They also discussed James Mitchell and the other officers who had been part of the security detail that day. Kate wanted to ensure they understood how much their vigilance and professionalism meant to her. Elizabeth promised to convey the princess's gratitude and noted that such recognition from the principal they protected was deeply meaningful to security personnel. As the meeting continued, Kate asked about the broader security environment. Were threats against the royal family increasing? What trends were security services observing? Elizabeth provided a measured response, explaining that while certain types of threats had evolved with technology, the overall security framework remained robust and effective. She explained that most concerning incidents never reached public awareness because they were identified and managed early. The parade situation was unusual in that it had occurred during an active event, but even then, the system had worked properly. Thousands of potential threats were evaluated and dismissed every year, very few ever developing into actual dangerous situations. Kate appreciated Elizabeth's candor. The princess had always believed that understanding risks honestly was better than being protected from uncomfortable truths. She viewed security briefings as important aspects of her role and took seriously the responsibility to cooperate fully with protective measures. Elizabeth concluded the official briefing portion of their meeting by reviewing updated protocols for Kate's upcoming appearances. They discussed communication systems, emergency procedures, and the expanded security footprint that would be implemented at certain high-profile events. Kate asked clarifying questions and confirmed her understanding of what might be required of her in various scenarios. The conversation then became more personal. Elizabeth had protected Kate for many years, and they had developed a relationship built on mutual respect and trust. Kate expressed how the knowledge of the security team's constant vigilance allowed her to focus on her public duties without constant worry. She knew that dedicated professionals were always working to ensure her safety and the safety of those around her. Elizabeth shared her own perspective on the unique challenges of royal protection. Unlike protecting political figures who might have opponents based on their policies, a royal security dealt with threats that could come from individuals with unpredictable motivations. Mental health issues, obsessive behaviors, and sometimes simply the desire for attention drove people to act in ways that created security concerns. They discussed how security considerations affected Kate's children and her hopes for giving them as normal a childhood as possible, despite their positions. Elizabeth assured her that protection for the younger royals was carefully designed to be minimally intrusive while remaining effective. The goal was always to enable normal life experiences while managing risks appropriately. As their meeting drew to a close, Kate thanked Elizabeth again for the thorough briefing and for the exceptional work of the entire security team. She reiterated her commitment to following security protocols and remaining mindful of the difficult job these professionals performed every day. Elizabeth departed, feeling confident that the princess fully understood both the incident and the continuing measures in place for her protection. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth returned to the security headquarters and documented the briefing in official records. Kate had taken the information seriously without becoming anxious or expressing any desire to reduce her public schedule. This reaction was exactly what Elizabeth had hoped for, confirming that the princess understood the realities of her position while maintaining her determination to serve the public effectively. The investigation into Marcus Webb continued over the following weeks, revealing a more complex picture than initially understood. Detective Inspector Graham Foster led the investigative team, coordinating with intelligence services, cybercrime units, and international partners. To trace the full extent of Marcus's activities and connections, Marcus's electronic devices provided the first major breakthrough. His laptop contained encrypted files that took specialists several days to access. Once opened, these files revealed communications with individuals in 3 different countries. The conversations were carefully worded to avoid explicitly discussing illegal activities, but the context made their intentions clear. Graham's team discovered that Marcus had been part of an online community focused on what members called security research. The group claimed to study vulnerabilities in protective systems to help improve them. However, their activities crossed well beyond legitimate security research into planning actual intrusions and disruptions. The international connections complicated the investigation significantly. Some of Marcus's contacts were in countries with limited cooperation agreements with British law enforcement. Tracking these individuals and understanding their roles in the network required diplomatic channels and intelligence, sharing protocols that took time to implement properly. Meanwhile, Marcus himself had initially remained mostly silent during interrogations. His lawyer had advised minimal cooperation, and Marcus had provided only the most basic information required by law. However, as evidence from his electronic devices was presented, his position became increasingly difficult to maintain. The technical analysis revealed that Marcus had been researching royal security protocols for over 6 months. He had collected publicly available information about parade routes, timing, and standard protective procedures. He had also attempted to purchase additional jamming equipment beyond what was found in his possession, suggesting his plans might have been even more elaborate than initially realized. Graham personally conducted several interrogation sessions with Marcus, gradually building a rapport and helping him understand the serious legal consequences he faced. The detective made clear that cooperation might result in reduced charges, while continued silence would likely lead to maximum sentences for the offenses already documented. After 2 weeks of detention, Marcus finally began providing substantial information. He admitted that the online community had evolved from discussing security systems theoretically to actually planning tests of those systems. What had started as academic interest had slowly transformed into something more dangerous, as group members encouraged each other toward increasingly risky actions. Marcus explained that he had been specifically interested in communication disruption. He believed that if security teams could not coordinate effectively, their protective capabilities would be severely compromised. His plan had been to activate the jamming devices at a critical moment during the parade, then observe how security personnel responded without their normal communication channels. When Graham pressed him on what he hoped to achieve beyond this observation, Marcus struggled to provide a coherent answer. He had not planned to physically harm anyone. He had not coordinated with others who might exploit the communications disruption. His motivation seemed to stem from a desire to prove his technical abilities and earn recognition within the online community rather than any political or ideological agenda. This made Marcus particularly dangerous in some ways. Unlike individuals motivated by clear ideological goals, whose actions might follow predictable patterns, Marcus represented a category of threat driven by ego and the desire for online status. Security services were increasingly concerned about such individuals, who sought notoriety through reckless actions. The investigation expanded to identify other members of the online community Marcus had been part of. International law enforcement agencies began monitoring the group's communications and activities. Several members in different countries were questioned about their involvement, though most claimed they had only discussed security topics, theoretically without planning actual interventions. 1. Particularly concerning discovery was that the group had shared information about security protocols at various high-profile events beyond just royal appearances. Museums, government buildings, international summits, and cultural celebrations had all been discussed as potential targets for their security tests. The investigation revealed a much broader potential threat than initially understood. Graham's team worked closely with intelligence analysts to assess which individuals in the network posed genuine threats versus those who simply engaged in online discussions without serious intent to act. This distinction was crucial for allocating limited investigative resources effectively and preventing actual dangerous activities. Back at Royal Security Headquarters, Director Elizabeth Hartley received regular updates from Graham's investigation. She used this information to refine security protocols and address newly identified vulnerabilities. The incident had revealed gaps in how security teams coordinated with private security personnel in nearby buildings, and improvements were being implemented systematically. Elizabeth also ordered a comprehensive review of communication systems used during royal events. While the jamming devices Marcus had carried would have created temporary disruptions, the security team needed backup communication methods that could function even during electronic interference. Traditional radio systems were supplemented with additional protocols, including visual signals, designated runners, and predetermined action plans that could be executed without constant communication. Training programs for royal protection officers were updated to include scenarios involving communication disruption. Officers practiced coordinating movements and responses using only visual contact and predetermined signals. These exercises revealed that while modern technology greatly enhanced security capabilities, the fundamentals of protective work still relied on human observation, judgment, and coordination. James Mitchell participated in several of these training sessions, sharing his experience from the parade when he first spotted the code red signal. His testimony helped other officers understand how crucial it was to maintain constant visual scanning and to recognize anomalies quickly. The training emphasized that technology was a tool to support human vigilance, not replace it. Sarah Chen, Kate's personal protection officer, also contributed to the updated training programs. She emphasized the importance of understanding the principle being protected, their habits, their likely reactions to stress, and their level of understanding about security protocols. Effective protection required not just technical skills, but also interpersonal understanding. Investigation gradually identified 12 individuals across 7 countries who had been active participants in the online community's more serious planning discussions. Most faced charges in their respective jurisdictions, though the severity varied based on local laws and the extent of each person's involvement. Marcus faced the most serious charges given that he had actually attempted to execute a plan. Graham worked with prosecutors to prepare the case against Marcus. The evidence was substantial, including the physical equipment found in his possession, the electronic communications documenting his planning, and his own eventual admissions about his intentions. The prosecution was confident about securing a conviction, though the exact sentence would depend on various factors, including Marcus's cooperation and the judge's assessment of his threat level. Robert Patterson, the security guard whose alert had initiated the response, became something of a quiet hero within security professional communities. He received recognition from multiple organizations and was invited to speak at security training conferences about the importance of vigilance and proper protocol. Robert remained humble about his role, insisting he had simply done his job properly. Kate personally met with Robert as Elizabeth had arranged. The meeting took place in a small office at the palace, away from media attention. Kate thanked Robert sincerely for his alertness and quick thinking. She presented him with a personal letter of commendation and a ceremonial award recognizing his service to public safety. Robert was deeply moved by the princess's gratitude. He explained to Kate that he had simply followed his training, but admitted that knowing his actions had potentially prevented harm to her, and the public gave him tremendous satisfaction. Kate assured him that his professionalism represented the best of the security profession and thanked him for his dedication. As weeks turned to months, the full scope of the investigation became clearer. Marcus had been part of a disturbing trend of individuals who treated security systems as games to be beaten rather than serious protective measures. While his specific attempt had been thwarted, the broader network he belonged to continued to pose challenges for law enforcement worldwide. 6 months after the parade incident, life had returned to a comfortable rhythm for everyone involved. Kate continued her charitable work with the same dedication and warmth that had made her beloved by the public. Her calendar remained filled with engagements supporting mental health initiatives, children's programs, and various causes close to her heart. James Mitchell had been promoted to Senior Protection Officer, partly in recognition of his alertness during the parade, but primarily because of his consistently excellent performance over many years. His new role involved more coordination and training responsibilities. Though he still regularly worked protective details for major events, he found satisfaction in mentoring younger officers and sharing the lessons learned from his experiences. The trial of Marcus Webb had concluded 3 months earlier. He had been convicted on multiple charges, including trespassing, possession of electronic interference devices, and conspiracy to disrupt public safety operations. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison, noting that while Marcus had not intended physical harm, his actions had created serious risks to public safety and required substantial law enforcement resources to address. During his sentencing hearing, Marcus had addressed the court with what appeared to be genuine remorse. He explained how his online activities had gradually escalated from theoretical discussions to actual planning without him fully recognizing how dangerous his path had become. He apologized to the royal family, to the security personnel who had been put at risk, and to the public whose safety he had threatened. The judge acknowledged Marcus's cooperation with investigators and his apparent understanding of the seriousness of his actions. However, she emphasized that society could not tolerate individuals treating security systems as personal challenges to overcome. The sentence needed to reflect both punishment for past actions and deterrence against future similar behavior by others. The international investigation into the online community Marcus had belonged to had produced mixed results. Several members in other countries had faced charges, though penalties varied widely based on local laws and the specific evidence available in each case. The online forum itself had been taken down, but security analysts knew that similar communities would likely emerge elsewhere. Director Elizabeth Hartley had used the incident to advocate successfully for increased funding for royal security operations. She presented the case to government officials as an example of evolving threats that required enhanced capabilities and training. The additional resources allowed for improved technology, expanded personnel, and more comprehensive coordination with other security agencies. The security improvements implemented after the parade had been tested through numerous subsequent royal events. Kate had attended dozens of public appearances, each proceeding smoothly with the enhanced protocols functioning effectively. The security team had developed increased confidence in their systems while remaining appropriately vigilant against new types of threats. Robert Patterson had accepted a new position with a security firm that specialized in protecting high-profile events and locations. His reputation within the security industry had grown substantially after the parade incident. He now trained other security personnel on observation techniques and proper threat reporting protocols. He remained grateful for the recognition he had received, but stayed focused on the practical work of keeping people safe. Sarah Chen continued as Kate's personal protection officer, their professional relationship strengthened by the shared experience of managing the parade situation. Sarah had developed an even deeper appreciation for the coordination required between different elements of the security team. She worked closely with James and other officers to continually refine their protective strategies. Kate herself had processed the parade incident in her own way. While initially concerned to learn how close a potential threat had been, she ultimately felt reassured by how effectively her security team had managed the situation. The incident reinforced her trust in the professionals dedicated to her protection and strengthened her resolve to continue her public work despite associated risks. She had spoken about the importance of security personnel during a private speech to law enforcement officials several months after the parade. Without revealing specific details about the incident, Kate expressed her deep appreciation for those who worked tirelessly to enable public figures to serve their communities safely. Her words had been deeply meaningful to the officers present. The mental health initiative that the parade had celebrated continued to expand and help thousands of families across the United Kingdom. The program's success validated Kate's years of advocacy and provided tangible evidence of positive change. Children and families who might have struggled in silence were now finding support and resources through the networks she had helped establish. James occasionally reflected on that morning during the parade. When he had first noticed the unusual light signal, he thought about how different things might have been if Robert Patterson had not been vigilant, if the code red signal had not been recognized, if the security team had not coordinated so effectively. The successful outcome had required multiple people doing their jobs excellently at critical moments. He also thought about the changing nature of threats in an increasingly connected world. Technology created wonderful opportunities, but also enabled new types of risks. Security professionals had to constantly adapt, learn, and prepare for scenarios that might not have existed even a few years earlier. The work was challenging, but deeply meaningful. Detective Inspector Graham Foster had moved on to other investigations. Though the parade case remained one of the most satisfying in his career, not because of the publicity or recognition, but because genuine harm had been prevented through good police work and effective collaboration between agencies. Those were the victories that mattered most in law enforcement. The lessons learned from the incident had been shared throughout law enforcement and security. Communities internationally, training programs, conference presentations, and official reports had disseminated best practices and insights. The goal was to ensure that other security teams could benefit from this experience and be better prepared for similar situations. One unexpected outcome had been improved coordination between royal security and private security firms throughout London. Regular meetings and joint training exercises had created stronger relationships and better communication protocols. The parade incident had demonstrated how important these partnerships could be, and both sides had committed to maintaining and strengthening them. As the first anniversary of the parade approached, the security team conducted a comprehensive review of everything that had occurred and everything they had learned. Elizabeth led this review personally, examining each decision point and each outcome. The goal was not to assign blame as the incident had been handled well, but to extract every possible lesson for future application. The review confirmed that the security system had worked essentially as designed. Human vigilance had identified the threat. Proper protocols had been followed to communicate it, and the security team had responded effectively to protect Kate and the public. Technology had supported these efforts, but had not replaced the importance of trained, alert professionals. Kate attended another major public event on the anniversary date. This one celebrating progress in early childhood education programs. She moved through crowds of well-wishers, shook hands with children and parents, and delivered a heartfelt speech about the importance of investing in young people's futures. The day proceeded without incident, exactly as everyone hoped and planned. James was among the security detail that day, positioned where he could observe both Kate and the surrounding environment. He felt the same sense of responsibility he had experienced during the parade a year earlier. Every event brought its own challenges and required the same level of attention. But the experience from that day had made him an even more capable officer. As the event concluded and Kate's motorcade departed safely, James allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The work of protection was rarely glamorous and often invisible when done well. Success meant that nothing happened, that threats were managed before they could develop, that the principal being protected could focus on their important work rather than worrying about their safety. That evening, several officers from the parade security detail gathered informally to mark the anniversary. They shared a meal and reminisced about that morning, discussing what they remembered and how the experience had influenced their professional development. Robert Patterson joined them, having been invited as an honorary member of the team that had worked together so effectively. The conversation was professional, but also warm, reflecting the bonds formed between people who had faced a challenging situation together and handled it well. They toasted absent colleagues, remembered specific moments from that day, and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to serve in meaningful work. Elizabeth stopped by briefly to thank them all personally. She reminded them that security work required constant vigilance but also deserved celebration when things went right. The parade incident represented everything she valued in her team, including observation, communication,